welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you very much, Sowore. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, well, as you know, the Carnegie Corporation, they have been involved, very, very deeply and in a very, very profound way in capacity building, across Africa. So they've got this fellowship, and they give grants and fellowships to African universities, and it's all part of the brain gain, not brain drain now, the brain gain initiatives, that are being encouraged by lots of funding institutions and organizations to encourage people like us, to just plow us back into the academy in Africa. You're moving there with your expertise, and the idea is, if you're going to give up your privileges here and some of the things you have, then to go and work there and impart knowledge, contribute to the development of academia in Africa, then they ought to be able to make you a little bit comfortable, in the right frame of mind to do your work. And so it's in that perspective that they sent me to Accra. Let me, so the idea is, of course, if they had partnerships with Nigeria, if they had a funding agreement with any of the universities in Nigeria, of course, my choice would have been Nigeria, because I went there specifically in the context of this Carnegie Fellowship. But unfortunately, as I understand it, I can't speak for Carnegie now. They, up until the year 2000 or thereabout, they had things going in Nigeria with some Nigerian universities, but then they had a lot of disruptions, because when you sit down here in New York and you make your plans, it's within specific time frames, and there's got to be deliverables. So you cannot send expertise into a system where there's so much disruption. People get down there and then there's a strike, and they cannot. For instance, the program I'm working on in Ghana, it's called an African Thinkers Program. It's a brand new graduate program domiciled in the Institute of African Studies. They are making a transition from the British system, the British graduate system, to the North American graduate studies system, which means now, instead of having PhD students or MPhil students just going directly to their research work, they are now going to do coursework. They are going to do 2 or 3 years of intensive coursework. So there's got to be courses. There's got to be core courses. There's got to be electives, and there's got to be a pool. So what I'm actually, and then there's got to be the resources, who's going to, if we are going to have a program in African thinkers, what are the resources on the ground, and who are those thinkers? Somebody's got to come in, design the courses. So I'm actually designing a pool of 7 elective graduate courses for them, about 2 or 3 core courses for them in African thought. I'm working on archives, I'm working on putting resources together, and I'm also doing workshops. I'm also doing workshops not just for grad students, but for faculty members, for fellow faculty members, trying to bring them up to par, in terms of the codes, the ethics, the ethos of a North American graduate program. Could you do that in a context of strikes, unending strikes, instability? My work depends a lot on a number of things. I've got to have 24/7 internet access. Because I'm going through an unbelievable, number of databases, archival work and research and what have you.
In Accra.
In a way.
Since you've been there.
In a way, I've been there. This is my 3rd month in Accra now, and it's getting to a stage where, if I see something that doesn't work, If I see something, if my internet begins to bleep or it's unstable, I actually rejoice. You know, in Yoruba, I don't know how to say that in English. In Yoruba, we call it etanu, which means any little thing that brings them to our level in Nigeria, because it's so frustrating. You know, you go to this small country, you know, they've got their challenges. It's not paradise. But I told our friend Ogaga Ifowodu, I said, okay, I have a problem classifying this country. It's a crime against humanity to call them third world. You know, you can't lump this country and Nigeria in the same bracket. You can't say this is the third world. And he said, why? I said, okay, my standard of living has not plummeted in any way significantly, you know, since I arrived here. I had light in Canada. It hasn't blinked a second here. I've got cold water from the taps in Canada. I've got it here. I've got hot water from the taps in Canada. I've got it here. So tell me one thing I'm missing. My internet is working. You know, okay, maybe there's one thing though. The telephone networks are just as crappy as Nigeria because they are supplied by the same companies, you know, MTN, Glo, Airtel, and whatever. And so when I see one index of third worldism or underdevelopment, or when I see a little bit of Nigeria, a little shade of Nigeria, I actually rejoice. Thank God, at least, you know. So that's how it's been. So it's been a learning process for me and a humbling process, you know, when you see, I wrote Parable of the Shower Head for you. So it's all about that experience, right? Yeah, so there's light, there's water. And by the way, just to finish that thought before you jump in, you know, after a month, then I said, okay, wait a minute. Maybe it's because I'm in Legon. Legon is, you know, it's posh, it's highbrow and all that. Let me not limit my assessment of things in this country to Legon. Let's spread out. Let's go out. Let's go to neighborhoods. And then you spread out and you see that, yeah, it may be, the development may be uneven, but at least there are certain factors that are there anywhere you go. The light is constant anywhere you go. And then, you know, little things, hygiene, they don't litter. You know, I tell people, you guys, I see pure water in this country now. I see pure water. You guys, you drink pure water like us. So where are the sachets? You know, where are the clogged sewers and whatever? Where are you throwing them? You know, so those little habits. Although I must admit that goes into the concept of the responsibility of the followership, you know, because it's not all about the leadership in Nigeria. The leadership doesn't necessarily litter in Nigeria. It's the people who go about littering, right? Yeah. But hey, yeah, so it's been a nice experience in Ghana, but well, so far so good. But then, of course, there's that part of me that would have loved to be able to go and do this in Nigeria. You know, and you know, I've got all kinds of commentaries from people. How do you feel? Why are you doing this? Is it not? People forget that the Nigerian patriot, the Nigerian intellectual activist in me is one thing, you know, and that Nigerian intellectual activist is completely beholden to Nigeria, completely committed to Nigeria. But there's also the academic, there's also the scholar in me, you know, there's also the African scholar, you know, there's the African knowledge producer, you know. And Africa is my playground, has always been my playground, the African Academy, you know, wherever. I was actually headed to South Africa. I was actually on my way to South Africa. I'd been given a position, a visiting professorship at the University of Johannesburg. You know, concluded negotiations and what have you. You know, when I was told about the Carnegie project, and the Carnegie people told me that You know, they have these projects going on in Makerere, in Uganda, and then in Ghana. But the project in Ghana is actually very close to the heart of the people here, and you know, they would really, really like me to be in charge. So it's, you know, you give back to your country, but you also give back to the continent. You know, so the continent is also your intellectual constituency, and people tend to forget that. Yeah, the full professor thing. Yeah, you know, Accra is beginning, UG Legon is beginning to throw that in my face. You know, everywhere I go, because you know, over there, you know, in Ghana, you know, and to some extent in Nigeria, everybody expects a 70-ish, gray-haired, pot-bellied guy, and then I step out and say, "Oh, you look like a graduate student." So I get that a lot, and it's been fun. Well, I've been around. I'm a proud Yagba man. I'm an Oko man. I'm from Isoluf, right in Yagba East local government area of Kogi State. You know, so I'm an Oko man. And well, my background. What do you? It's
Where did you go to school, like especially university?
Yeah, I went to the I went to the University of Ilorin. I wasn't like you, sure. I wasn't. I was very political in the sense of being a foot soldier for our Aluta leadership. So I did not miss any Aluta. Trust me. You know, it was part of the, you know, all these songs and the chantings and all that. So I was very, very active, you know, on those fronts in the university. But I was also an EFICO, you know. Both parents being educationists, secondary school principals, in the missionary tradition of yore. You know, my dad had been sent to Scotland by Catholic missionaries and stuff, and you know, that generation, they came back after independence. They came back. Actually, the bishop, the Catholic bishop of Lokoja diocese then, from Quebec, from the province of Quebec, you know, in Canada, Bishop Delisle, actually reached out after independence to my father's generation, you know, people in my father's generation who had been sent to Scotland, to the US, you know, by the missions. We're starting all these missionary schools, and you have to come home and take over and build your country, you know. And so my father went home in the early 60s, you know, much to the displeasure of his 3 children. You know, it's like, you guys, you have no foresight. You should have remained in Britain and given birth to all your children. Give us this, partly now, this citizenship thing. You just package everybody and you go and make us, you know. But of course, that's after Nigeria began to go down the, you know, in the 80s. So, but that gives you a window into my background. You know, very, very intellectual, very, very. All books. Between the man spent his whole life building our family library, you know. So he was the type. He got his salary at the end of every month, and then his last born, his only son, will get into the car. Would start at the university bookstore. You know, we don't say bookstore in Nigeria, like bookshop in Ilorin. Would buy books, you know, history, literature, politics, you know, and all that. Would go to Ife, Ibadan, and all that. So by the time I got to Ilorin, I was really loaded, you know, upstairs. And well, I studied French. So I made a first class in French, and then I went to Ibadan and did a master's in French too. And then after that, I joined up with the French Institute for Research in Africa, which is a French government-owned high-level research institute based at the University of Ibadan. I understand they have a branch out there at ABU now, but it used to be Ibadan, Nairobi, Harare, and Johannesburg, where, you know, the French government, you know, they have this idea of trying to compete with the British even on their own turf. So they'll be pumping money into research quietly and all that. So I was involved with that outfit in Ibadan. Ibadan. That's, up the way to the Abacha years, through the Abacha years. But then by 97, it had become clear that that source of funding was drying up. And I didn't want to move because I was in Ibadan, but I was not in Nigerian conditions. I was in first world conditions in Ifra, in Ibadan. And for 5 years that lasted, the romance lasted. So that one was drying out, and the option was, okay, you were going to go into Nigerian conditions in Abacha's world. And I didn't want that, so in 97 I got a fellowship offer to go to IFAS, which is the French Institute of South Africa. So I went to Johannesburg for a couple of months, and it was while I was in Johannesburg that I got another offer to go to Paris. Of course, I'd been in and out of Paris before then and all that because of the French connection, my French connection. And while in Paris, I was offered a very, very prestigious Canadian fellowship to move to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, in Canada, for my PhD. And then the rest, as the cliche goes, is history. So
So you've been in Canada?
Yeah, so I got to Canada in 97, I believe, at the end of 97. And then when I finished my PhD at UBC, well, actually gone, when I finished my PhD at UBC, my first job was actually here in the United States. So I moved to the US. And for 5 years, I was an assistant professor of comparative literature at Penn State. So I was at Penn State, and then 5 years later, I moved back to Canada. So it's been on and off, and yeah. I don't know. I guess it's because I write in very many genres. I do your straightforward prose. I do the personal narrative, creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction. It's actually, it's a creative, which is what I won the Penguin Prize for. That's the category I won the prize for, the Penguin Prize, and for African writing. Creative nonfiction, and then you deploy that in the context of social and political analysis. So it's been a very beautiful marriage for me. I guess I've honed it over the years. You chance upon it, and then it works, and you begin to hone it. But it also has to be based on a certain kind of foundation. The foundation of traditional knowledges, traditional. Okay, I'm going to say epistemologies now, and you're going to say I'm being bombastic. So, which comes from my early immersion, in, I guess it's the way, how do I put this? The way the village setup was when I was growing up, where you moved constantly between worlds. So I was this middle class kid then, growing up in a missionary context, so mission school, 2 parents, educationists and all that, very Catholic, very Britico in there. So, coca oats in the morning, planter, you had all that, custard, you had all that on the menu, but when they've gone to work, or they've gone to other places, then there are the traditional people too, your grandmoms, the 2 grandmas, you go to the farm with them, you have your ogi with them, because, so you constantly, I moved between worlds. I moved constantly between those two, so that influenced my writing, so I could, so I was at once very traditional, the Okun Yoruba foundation, was very solidly laid, and also the Anglo-French middle class cultural aesthetics and modes of thinking and right. But of course, all of that would come to naught if there wasn't talent. If you are either born to write or you are not born to write. There will always be that attitude in the North American classroom, in the North American system, where, sometimes there will always be that one kid, the two kids or three kids, the very first day of class, you walk in, they'll stand up and walk out, and sometimes but you saw the last name. Even if you mistook Pius for a Canadian or an American, as the case may be, when I was back at Penn State, didn't you see the last name? Didn't it tell you that it wasn't going to be what so why are you just standing up and walking out? But by and large, one has to, and then of course the accent thing, and all that it comes. But I'm very unsympathetic to those kinds of sentiments. I'm very, very unsympathetic. I teach. I don't try to polish the accent or Americanize it or Canadianize it or anyway. I just tell them to listen. What I owe you is impeccable British or English grammar, however you want to put. That's all I owe you. And that grammar must also deliver stuff. It must deliver knowledge. Once I satisfy those two obligations, you better clean your, because you've got an accent too. You've got a Canadian. Let me give you a story. In 2006, or was it 2005, Wale Soyinka came to give the most prestigious lecture at Carleton University. He came to deliver this huge, and of course there were almost 1,000 people in that hall. It's Kongi now, he's in town. So everybody wanted a piece of him. And he gave this wonderful, unbelievably wonderful lecture. And during Q&A, question and answer, this lady stands up, and I'm the MC of the event and all that. This lady stands up and then asks, that's in all my years in Canada, she still holds the distinction of having the thickest Canadian accent I've ever heard. I mean, so Kungi was, excuse me? She repeated it 4 or 5 times. And then I tried to, and then some other people tried, and then Kungi finally got and he said, oh, and he was trying to be polite. Oh, I'm so sorry, it's your accent. The girl freaked out in the audience. Oh my God, I have an accent! I have an accent! I have an accent! Oh yeah, hello, you've got an accent. It's everybody's got an accent. So I try to let students understand that, but at a more serious intellectual level, you have to understand that area studies has been around now for quite a while in the North American system, post-colonial studies, cultural studies, and they have encouraged, those areas of knowledge have encouraged openness, so people can no longer say, that, we're new to these things, we're new to these guys, we've been around for a while now, and we've been, the scope has been expanding, and people have been very, very receptive, I must say, people have been very, very, by and large. To an African, I would have had a tough time deciding between Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Nuruddin Farah, but I think I would have voted for Ngugi. I was actually hoping that Ngugi would, and he's been in the news lately. The guy is prolific. It's unbelievable. It's been almost one solid book a year now. In the last, he just did Globaletics, and he's been doing his memoirs. He's been very much in the news. He won an award. Was it last week or something? So which one actually thought was a prelude to the Nobel Prize. So I would have voted for Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and that's who I would have voted for.
Is he the one who influenced you the most?
Ngugi certainly did influence me, but actually you'll be amazed who influenced me the most.
Go ahead, tell us.
Dio Fagunwa.
Wow.
Dio Fagunwa. You know, I read all of Fagunwa in high school. I went to Titcombe College. I read all 5 novels.
So Dio Fagunwa, for people who don't know him,
Yeah.
writes in Europe.
Dio Fagunwa writes in Europe. He's the master of the Yoruba imagination. But people who don't know him, they've certainly encountered emanations of him, either through, I don't know if it's a fair thing to say, if you could call Amos Tutuola, but it's the same life world that they came from. And then Ben Okri. Ben Okri I see as no, not the new, because Ben Okri after Songs of Enchantment, I don't know what he's been up to. I don't know what he's writing. I stopped following him. But the Ben Okri of the early career to mid-career Ben Okri, down to, you know, so I'm trying to remember the Booker Prize winning novel now. Was it in 93 or so? Something is wrong with The Famished Road. Oh, the Famished Road, yeah. That's you know, it's all that line. You could draw a straight line from Fagunwa, at least the use of the imagination. Fagunwa's best book. I'm not going to give it to the Forest of 1,000. Do you want me to give the titles in Yoruba now or in English? You know, for your audience. Forest of 1,000 Demons. That's not his best book. His best book for me would be, because that's the most relevant to Nigeria, would be, I think it's Irekerindo. You know, that's where you have, I'm going to have to do some very tough translations. That's where you have Ilu Awon Ididare, right? Níbi tí òmùgọ̀ méjì gbé ṣe ọba wọn. You can't have a better summary of Nigeria. You can't have. I'm just still letting it sink in. You know, ẹ káàbọ̀ sí ìlú àwọn Ididare. Níbi tí òmùgọ̀ méjì gbé ṣe ọba wọn. That is Irekerindo. I hope I'm sure your audience will forgive me if it turns out to be from another Fagun. I'm sure it's Ireke Onibudo. No, not Ireke Onibudo. Irekerindo. Nínú Igbo Ilegbeje, which was translated as Expedition to the Mount of Thought. Expedition to the Mount of Thought. And so the hunters are going, as is always the case in Fagunwas. So all these hunters are going through the forest and they're encountering all kinds of weird, strange creatures and locations until they arrive at the town of it's almost where Pastor Tunde Bakari was coming from. The town of fools ruled by who now? Omogodi Meji. By stupidity raised to power too. So welcome to the town of fools where their king ruled by idiots, something like that. And when you see what goes on in that town and the thinking process of their kings, you just wowed. It's like was Fagunwa projecting to 2000? Was Fagunwa projecting to the Nigeria of 1999 all the way to October 10, 2013. I have a lot of sympathy, I must admit, for those who are very skeptical about this, because we've been there before. We've been there before. What are they calling it? Dialogue or conference? They didn't even know what to call it. He said conference or dialogue, right? But let's assume that, you know, that's a minor detail. But, you know, you get tired. You get tired of the games. You get tired. You know, the last person to... President Jonathan is the last person. You know why? Because he's got all these committees. He's got all these committees. He's got all these reports. You know, more than 70 by my rough estimate, of committees and reports, and, you know, that he's been sitting on, doing nothing about them. So the idea of the same man who has such a horrible track record in terms of convening things and actually acting on their reports. So that just, gets under my skin. So I have a lot of sympathy for, and people are confusing that justifiable skepticism with refusal or hostility to dialogue. I've heard people say, so what do you want? What do you want? It's not a question of what do you want. It's a question of the credibility gap. The guy who is behind this thing and why he's suddenly doing it now. And then why the word sovereign is still an anathema. And what the role, David Mark. David Mark is also now an apostle of dialogue. Come on. So what's going on? What's really going on? So I say, welcome to Distractionville. I've written about it. I'm also very active in social media. So I've got followership in social media. So I think somewhere along the line, Oronto Douglas finally, started earning his billions in terms of strategizing for his boss. That's my own suspicion. I don't know. Give them, in the French tradition, it was give them bread, right? So give them, throw a bone to the dogs and let's distract them, because now all of a sudden all the flashpoints, all the difficult issues for the president, nobody's talking about them anymore. Everybody's focused on this thing, and I think it's just going to be another talk shop, because what are the modalities? I don't believe in that thing. Let's have electoral reform. Let's have, let's implement most of the reports of past talk shops and committees. Let's do something about the National Assembly. Let them get to work. We actually haven't given up. We had no illusion. We had no illusion, when we went into that thing, in terms of thinking that it would be these, But to be frank, we actually expected more than we got. And it's an education. It's a learning process in terms of knowing where people really are, how much change they desire, for Nigeria, and how far they are prepared to go to fight for it. Oh, sorry, I'm not aware of that. But hey, that doesn't mean anything. They might have met in...
This was actually a photograph on Facebook where he met him in his office.
Well, at a certain level, sometimes, I wouldn't put, because Tunji Arioma is one of the most... I don't have enough superlatives to describe that guy. He's one of the most patriotic, hardworking, intelligent. He's an engineer. Yes. So here's a guy who actually, every idea he's putting, he's not an abstract theoretician and thinker like me. Every idea you see him putting forward in terms of how to develop Nigeria, he actually has a blueprint. But I always tell people, if I go to Abuja today, for instance, if I go to Abuja today, there'll be people you'll see. There'll be people you'll bump into. There'll be events you'll go to that at a certain level, we have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic. Am I going to go to Abuja today and not shake hands with Ken Wiwa or with Sam Mamadi, right? And so, Ken Wiwa, my very good friend, Ken used to call me PA in PA, right? PA in PA, Pius Adesanmi in Pennsylvania. So that's how, but now our friend has been inherited by 3 presidents. They are passing him on. I used to joke, I said, Ken, you are almost becoming like the furniture in Aso Rock. It's like, Obasanjo brought you there, passed you on to Yaradua, and who passed you on to Jonathan and all that. So am I going to go there and not have a beer with Ken? So I didn't see that photo, but we have nothing to worry about. Yes. Sometimes you've seen little pockets of people actually organizing to do things. You know, the protests you covered recently, the National Assembly protests you covered recently, you know, the youth against something, it was largely powered by social media. Occupy Nigeria was largely powered by social media, you know, and even apart from that, because social media, people don't just use it. There's a young Nigerian activist, a young Nigerian lady, who's a good social media friend of mine. Her name is Petra Aketi Onyebule, I believe. Of course, she's into activism, mobilizing, and all the. She's one of the children, the collective children of anger, you know, according to our friend, you know, Ruben Abati. But now she's mobilizing for premature children. She's mobilizing for premature children. It's like, okay, this is a cause that's dear to me. You know, a lot of premature children in Nigerian hospitals because there are no resources, right? There aren't nearly enough resources, and they die unnecessarily. And she's been getting results. And so you see people even branching out from activism and noise making and using social media, you know, to rally people for all kinds of causes. You know, there's a military guy who is wounded in Mali and all that. Let's rehabilitate him. There's this guy who just who has this idea. So I see a lot of things. So people are also they're not just mobilizing, you know, and conscientizing for activism and political activities. There's a lot of social causes. There's a lot of economic causes that people are using the social, that generation, that they're using the social media for. I have addressed that in one of my interviews in the past, and that is, we are fighting for Nigeria at multiple levels. We are also fighting for a restoration. I'm not sure I should even call it restoration. I should call it an instauration of a certain kind of ethos. As things stand in Nigeria, people believe that the only way to make it is joining government. That's one set of people. You'll put 99.9% of Nigerians in that category. The only way that you can be deemed to have made it, to have been deemed to, or to have arrived, is you join government. There's another category of people. They are more conscientious, they are more patriotic. But then their definition of building Nigeria, concretely, of giving back to Nigeria, also comes down to going in. So that, hey, if you are called to serve, that's how they frame it. If you're called to serve, would you say yes? What do you think I've been doing? What do you think I have been doing with my intellectual gifts, with my writing? I'm building Nigerian intellection. That is serving. I am making it in another kind of way. We can't all go into government. That's not, I am an ambassador for that country everywhere I go. Yeah, you know, that comes with the territory. You know, I would get to my office because you know the way we are. That's one disadvantage with the North American system. Anybody pulls you up on the internet, they get your phone number, they get your extension. So I do get to my office. That's a very common routine, and then there'll be all kinds of strange messages, you know, from Nigeria. And then once in a while, you know, my mom, they get to my mom, you know, my mom in the village, you know, you say, you know, I hear you are doing this, and then we're getting strange. So it happens. And then, of course, you know, yeah, I get a lot of attention, you know, from government officials. I get a lot of attention because, you know, sometimes we assume that they don't read us. but they actually do. They read us, they are concerned about what we write, they are concerned about what we plan to write. You know, sometimes I get people calling me, those who think I'm your employee. You know, why is he allowing you? I'm going to get Sowore to sack you. I'm going to try to do this. So you are assuming you can, A, you can influence Sowore. B, you are assuming that I'm his employee or he's going to influence my writing or the type. So you get all that. But then one thing I've come to understand about these government officials is that once they determine that you are real, that you are not in this thing for contracts or for appointment or for that, you are genuinely just concerned and passionate about Nigeria, they respect you. They do respect you. Fundamentally, they respect you. You know, one day there was I was having an interaction with this guy, with one of my readers, and who has Sanusi Lamido Sanusi's phone number. You know, it's like, oh, you know, I talk to Sanusi a lot, and I see that you have been critical of him recently on Facebook. His phone number, so that you can take up some of these issues with him. So, who told you I don't know SLS? So I know SLS. I don't have his phone number. You know, we've exchanged emails, you know, not very regularly and all that. And the guy was like, I'll give you his phone number. I said, I don't want it. Here's the deal. My phone is filled, my address book is filled with phone numbers of Nigerian government officials. Not because I have ever solicited any. But sometimes, if you write about a department, they reach out to you and say, look, you know, I appreciate what you did, you've been critical, but next time, you know, if you want to reach me and find out, you know, and so you have governors sending their numbers to you, you have ministers, you have directors of agencies, you know, I said, if you send it, fine, it's in my phone book, but I'm not out to solicit. So I'm not out to solicit numbers. So you'll have, it's not possible to, and that's what I tell people, it's not possible to do what we do the way we do it and at this level without having very high connections in the Nigerian government. You know, they know you, you know them, you know, and then we still have to deal with them. They're the ones in charge of the system we are trying to improve. You know, it's the modalities of engagement. That's where the hard knot is. 2015. If I could choose who would preside over Nigeria as president, that would be Pastor Tunde Bakare.
Why? People will ask you.
Why people will ask me? I've worked closely with him now in the last 2 or 3 years. I've listened to him in several contexts, and well, he's got what it takes, right? The intellect, the passion, the zeal, and the vision, you know. And so that would be my choice. And then,
Surprised you didn't say Pius Adesanmi.
Pius Adesanmi would just be content, still pouring his own intellect into the Nigerian intellect, trying to enrich it, trying to build it. You know, public instruction. That's what he would love to be able to continue to do. That's it, no matter who is in power.
So, as they say in France, c'est fini.
C'est fini.